Welcome to the Lawless Astrology channel. My name's Dabney. I'm an evolutionary astrologer, and today I am joined by the legendary Christopher Renstrom, who I'm so excited to have. Hi, Christopher.
So excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me on the show.
Yeah, so if you don't know Christopher Renstrom's work, he has his own YouTube channel, which is amazing, and it's going to be put down below. He is an author of 3 books. Only 2 are currently available: The Cosmic Calendar and Rise and Shine, which is about the ascendant, how you show up in the world. And he has his own membership called Ruling Planets on his website, rulingplanets.com, so you can get horoscopes delivered directly to you. And he is just very fabulous. So we are very lucky to have him. So, what are we
Well,
going to be talking about today? Today, we're going to be talking about 2025 transits and how this is a big changeover in the energy. And we're going from earth and water, which is traditionally considered more yin energy, more kind of grounded energy, to fire and air.
right.
And what is that going to portend? What does that have to do with a lot of what we're seeing with kind of a rise in online? A lot of the manosphere, is kind of like, you see like the Joe Rogans and the Andrew Tates, even though those two are very different, but there is this kind of new male archetype that is kind of hyper masculine, that is impacting younger voters and society at large. And what does that all mean, and how does this cosmic energy play into it? So those are some of the themes about what we're going to talk about. And we're also going to touch upon how you can kind of live your best life during this time, knowing that a lot of these big changes are coming. So anyway,
Yeah.
does that kind of set it up,
That
Christopher?
sounds pretty good. That sounds pretty good
Okay.
to me. Okay.
Okay, so let's just first start with kind of setting the stage, because Pluto just went into Aquarius. And
Hmm.
that's energy that we are already living under. And this is kind of the first one of these big transit changes of
Right.
the outer planets that's taking place. So do you want to just kind of talk, briefly about Pluto and Aquarius in that sort of big picture?
Yeah. Just to sort of like set it up here, whenever the modern planets change zodiac signs, that always has a very significant impact on our lives, down here on planet Earth. And that's because the modern planets take such a long time to go through one zodiac sign. Uranus will spend 7 years in one sign. Neptune is 13 to 14 years in just one sign. And then Pluto, because of its elliptical orbit, can be anywhere from 12 to 32 years in just one zodiac sign. Okay, so whenever the modern planets, and when I'm saying modern or moderns, okay, these are planets that were discovered after 1781, which is the modern period. Okay, and that's Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And they were enormous because they sort of shook up the original roster of planets. Until 1781, you had the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Saturn was the last one. That was it. 1781, Uranus, the planet of revolution and change, is discovered, and it upsets not only the order of the planets as they had been known for centuries, but it also upsets life in here in Western civilization. It is discovered in 1781, the midpoint between the American War for Independence and the French Revolution. And so this got astrologers sort of thinking beyond the 7 planets and thinking in terms of longer transits. When Neptune gets discovered in 1846 and Pluto discovered in 1930. So whenever you have any one of those 3 modern planets changing signs, that's a big event. To have all 3 planets change within, what are we talking about here? 2024, 2025,
A
20.
1 year period, really, it
Yeah,
is.
it's like a 1 year period bracketed really in that 2024, 5, 6 is enormous. What makes it even more enormous is that they move into air and fire signs, which were traditionally referred to as the masculine signs in astrology. And nowadays we'll use the word yin and yang. So whenever you have air and fire that's being activated during this period of time, It's more accelerated in terms of its energy, and it's more volatile in terms of its energy, and it's more showy, okay, in terms of its energy. So this portends a volatile time, and people, the first response is like volatile. Oh no, that's not good, and things like that. But what's really extraordinary about the architecture of these three planets is that they will all be sextiling one another. Okay. And sextiles are benevolent aspects in astrology. Not only do the planets sort of help one another out, but sextiles are there to sort of take the pressure or the stress out of oppositions or out of squares. So this sextiling energy that's taking place is actually, for me, a reason for optimism and for looking ahead. And that's something that I'm very excited about.
Oh, I agree completely. Like that is the saving grace with, there's all these other sort of doomsday kind of YouTube programs out there talking about, Uranus, this is when it went to war. And there is definitely a war-like energy, but there's always wars taking place if we really think about it. And so I agree with you, like that those harmonious aspects might mean some kind of progress at least.
Well, or at least that the energy has an outlet. A lot of times when we have things like oppositions or squares, these are build-ups and pressure. It's kind of like little tremors in California keep California from having an enormous earthquake, sort of thing. It's a release of those energies. And we have releases of energies that take place all the time in our lives. So it's something that I like to see up in the heavens, astrologically speaking. But the prelude really to Pluto moving into Aquarius really is going to have its seeds in the shutdown of the world when Saturn was in the zodiac sign of Aquarius, and there was that conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn right at the end of 2020 in Aquarius. So that was really our first taste of it, and so when we talk about Aquarius on a world level, these aspects are taking place on a world level. There has been no other time in the history of our planet in which the entire world was shut down. Okay. And Aquarius, the main concern of Aquarius, what Aquarius stands for in astrology is basically it's the idea that a society is only as good as the people in it. Okay, this is the Aquarian idea. So when Saturn was in Aquarius during the COVID period of time, that was Saturn sort of sending everyone to their rooms, you know, as punishment and sitting there and thinking about the world that they wanted to create when they came back out of their rooms again. Okay, so that was Saturn's way of doing a lockdown. Literally, it was a cosmic lockdown that we experienced here. So a lot of this Pluto moving into Aquarius, and it moves in at the beginning of last year, 2024, is coming out of that lockdown. It's coming out of, and a lot of the reaction to that lockdown. People lost loved ones during the lockdown. People lost their jobs, their businesses during the lockdown. There was this whole sort of like, did you get a vaccine or not? And how do you treat other people? Like if you're walking around unvaccinated, are you putting people at risk, at harm? These were like ideas we were dealing with our day-to-day life, but I want you to sort of put them on a larger level because this is what Pluto is going to be dealing with on a larger level. What kind of society are you living in? What is each person's responsibility to another person in society? You know, whether it's a political responsibility, a civic responsibility, a moral responsibility. These ideas, society is only as good as the people in it. These are the true, in my opinion, Pluto and Aquarius ideas that we're going to be dealing with.
I think that's pretty profound and it's nice. I don't think I do a lot about connecting the pandemic to this time and how that really was a precursor. And you're right. We, was that was the big question for everyone. I mean, the lockdowns were to protect society, right? That was the whole intention. Now, whether you agree with that or not, if it succeeded, if it went on too long, I mean, there's all different things that were at play during that. And it was a very complicated question. And I think we're still dealing with very complicated, everything's a lot more complicated than simple answers. It was then, and I think it's going to be now.
Yeah, and we have to keep in mind Saturn in Aquarius was important because Saturn's the ruler of Aquarius. So that's really Saturn kind of handing the energy off to Pluto that's going to take over Aquarius. And this hit at very resonant themes in America. Pluto in Aquarius right now is taking place on the what we call Pluto return, okay, of the United States Constitution. Okay, so in other words, at the time that the United States Constitution was being drafted, Pluto was in Aquarius. All right. Remember, Aquarius, what is the idea of Aquarius? Society is only as good as the people in it. Pluto, the planet of ordeals and the transformations that arise from them. You don't get to cut ahead in line to the transformation part. You go through the ordeal, and the ordeal is the thing that triggers the transformation. What do we have going on in the period of time that Pluto is in Aquarius? We have extraordinary events. We have the discovery of Uranus. Okay, in 1781 takes place when Pluto is in Aquarius. Okay, that's the overthrow of the planetary order that I just mentioned to you. What we also have is America going from having built its independence to becoming the great experiment. Okay, this was being watched all over Europe, okay, because this was the product of the Enlightenment, which had taken seed in Europe already for about maybe 150, 200 years. So could a country rule itself as a democracy was the enormous question that was being asked. When you look at the founding fathers, we think of them as founding fathers, sage, or whatever. They were kids. They were in their late 20s and 30s, okay,
Mhm.
coming up with these ideas and then drafting them into a constitution. A few years after that, still during the period of time of Pluto and Aquarius, you have the French Revolution, okay, which had the rights of man, okay, was their battle cry, but where you saw a society ripped apart by revolution, where they overthrew the wealthy class. They did more than overthrow them, they decapitated them. Okay, so it was, and that French Revolution, where all of society was thrown upside down, and Uranus is the idea of what's up is down, what's down is up, and just kicking over the game board and sending all the pieces flying. And I refer to Uranus because it's the modern rule of Aquarius. So that's the thematic links there. So here you have a society that's supposed to be free and governing itself, and a society that people called madmen and women who had taken the aristocracy prisoner, rolled them down the Champs-Élysées or whatever, and decapitated them. And it was a bloodbath and got rid of the calendar. And, we're going to start with year one, and this whole sort of thing. So you really have these two ideas held together. So when people talk about, is this a time of revolution and change and, anger at the wealthy or whatever, these are very real themes that are coming back again because Pluto rules the underworld. It's everything that's subterranean. Okay, so these are these underworld themes that are coming back out again and playing out in society. But the choice, and this is what astrology has always stood for, the choice lies with each one of us. What do we want to do with that energy? But at the same time, we have to read the signs of the times, what is coming out. So it's not a coincidence that a lot of the things we face today resemble a lot of things that were going on in America, particularly um, back with the drafting of the original US Constitution.
Yeah. So again, very complicated times, but that haves and have nots battle coming to the forefront, things kind of coming to a crisis point where it builds and builds and builds, and then the planetary energy kind of inspires people to take action in a new way.
And hopefully a new and positive way. you
Right.
know.
That's that sextile we're talking about. Hopefully it won't be.
My dear, that's that sextile we're banking on.
That's kind of our saving grace. That's the optimism that we're holding on to, because as then we move into Neptune moving into Aries, that which starts March 30th.
Yeah.
So that's the next big piece. Of this sort of rollover, and to your point, this is a whole process kind of between 2025 and 2026, because there will be some retrograde motion where next fall and until next winter a little bit we'll be cleaning up a little bit of what we're dealing with now, but then by 2026 we're off to the races. And
Yeah.
so let's talk about Neptune in Aries. I love the way Christopher describes Neptune, because it was not how I was taught Neptune. And now I'm really have integrated that into my
Oh,
practice. Yeah, I was really lucky. I got to take a class from Christopher, and that was one of the big things that I wanted to talk to him about too. And we'll get to that, but was just, I love how he describes some of these energies. But anyways, let's talk about Neptune in Aries. And what does Neptune do? You give me the
Neptune
word, glamorize it.
glamorizes, you know, and of course we always think of glamorizing as like glamour fashion magazine, you know, or something like that. But also glamour is a magical word that was sort of reintroduced into the popular imagination with the Harry Potter series. I mean, I think there's something in which they learn spells of glamour, you know, where they can make something appear more beautiful or intoxicating or appealing than it really is. And this is what Neptune does in astrology. Okay, it glamorizes. Neptune is associated with a number of different things. One of them is visions and visionaries. But the glamorization is something that I would like to focus on with Neptune going into Aries. What it does is that it makes the themes of Aries glamorous. Okay. And Aries, as we know, is ruled by Mars, the god of war. And Aries is very much, you know, what we would consider a masculine sign. Now, that doesn't mean that women can't be Aries. We have lots of women who are Aries, but there is a sort of action prone, you know, values that are associated with, uh, that were associated with men for centuries that are connected to Aries. So what happens here is that you have this sort of glamorization of the male. Now, it's not going to be just like glamorization of the male, like a Calvin Klein model, you know, someone like in their briefs, you know, like in a tall billboard on, you know, and nothing wrong with that. But you're going to have glamorization of the male, of coming to the rescue, of being the hero, of, you know, virility. And this can go in one of two ways. You can have the negative and you can have the positive. The negative can be the thug, you know, I'm going to use profane language and that's going to make me sound virile. You know, I'm going to outshout someone or insult or put someone down. That's very, you know, caveman, you know, clubbing someone over the head. And this makes me very potent and this makes me very virile. And, you know, when I do this, people know I mean my business and I'm a dominant personality. Okay. The other thing that you can have arise also out of it are the higher virtues of Aries. And the higher virtues of Aries is best embodied in what we call the chivalric code. These were the Knights of the Round Table who went to the rescue of people in distress. It wasn't just maidens in distress, it was people in distress. And knights, before they're repackaged in the Arthurian legends, are thugs. Okay, they go off to the Middle East on the Crusades. They come back with a lot of money. You know, they build castles, they take in serfs and peasants, they exploit them, and they beat them over the head. And, you know, they're awful. But what happens with the recasting of the Arthurian legend and why it took on so much mileage is that it taught men to be more than a thug. You know, that might doesn't make right. When you stand up for principles, when you stand up for morality, when you make personal sacrifices for someone else, this is something that really, and it doesn't really get a lot of appreciation. It's something that actually turned around a very hostile chauvinism, okay, of men, and it turned it around in Europe, at least, Western Europe, at least, and it gave a much more positive and alluring possibility. And so that idea of being the knight in shining armor, being chivalric, appealed to the male imagination. They wanted to do this. This was better than just like, burning and pillaging villages. This was something that they really, really liked. And so that can be like the appealing and the positive side of the Neptune in Aries. And the reason I bring it up, and I'm talking about men a lot, is because men are in crisis right now. It's more than just like toxic male or whatever. I don't think men know what they're doing with themselves right now. They do the profanity, or they make all the money, or they, scrape their way to the top or whatever. Does it make them happy? Does it make them good people? How many of the people who are on top of these ladders are philanthropic, give to society? How many of these men in these positions are role models for other men, who kind of need them? So this idea of the myth of the male is going to be very strong with Neptune going into Uranus. And it can either be a shimmering mirage, something that's appealing, or something that's very disillusioning, and makes, men feel empty. So it will appear first as a yearning for something better, a yearning of like a better vision of life or a higher meaning in life. But then it will also introduce disappointments or disillusionments. We all know that disappointments and disillusionments are part of a journey of individuation. They lead to a betterment, a deepening of ourselves. But sometimes people react to disappointments and disillusionment and heartbreak, and they stop right there, and it becomes embittered. So these are the themes that we're going to start seeing more and more pronounced as Neptune gets closer to entering the zodiac sign of Aries.
So when I think about, kind of the ugly Aries, when you were talking about that, what came to me was when Nick Fuentes said, "Your body, my choice."
Right.
That's like the ugly, that's the toxic downside. But to your point, I'd had the last video I did, I touched on this, and that I had a discussion with my teacher, Stephen Forrest, a couple years ago, and I wasn't fully grasping what he was saying about the fact that the American male needs a new myth. We need something to hold on to, because to your point, they're in crisis. There was a sense that, you go to college and there was these broken promises in a lot of ways. And
Right.
so in the absence of feeling like what your destiny is, or how to feel good about yourself. And I know a lot of white men especially feel under attack, even if that isn't specifically what's happening. I mean, it might be happening in some circles, but it feels like it. And so it doesn't really matter if somebody's in pain. If they're in pain, we have to address that. Just like I think that we've needed to address, female pain and pain of people of color. And so, but I think at the bottom line is they're confused. They don't necessarily know where they're going. And so it's like this is here. This is happening. And so Neptune in Aries is going to exacerbate, which I think is what you're saying, what's already here. But now it's like, what mythology do we lean into? Do we create a new mythology? And Neptune and Pisces had all of this beautiful potential, but what a letdown in a lot of ways.
Hey, you heard it from her. What a
Am I
disillusionment.
Well, I think it brought in a lot of like escapism and addiction. And I think, there was a lot of the downside of Neptune in Pisces that we've experienced. And so, we can prepare for the downside of Neptune in Aries, which would be, a glamorization of war, a glamorization of violence, a glamorization of selfishness and me
Dominance.
too.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Just
Yeah.
like I'm first, I'm the best. But if we do lean into that as a society and recognize the high side of that is actually what you're saying, like chivalry and
Well, the idea of personal sacrifice was always an Aries idea rather than a Pisces one. Remember that passion, as in the passion of Christ, which is the origin of the word passion,
I love when you talk about this stuff. It fascinates me.
Well, associated to Easter, which is always an Aries, which is always an Aries's sign, okay? And passion meant the suffering. Okay, nowadays we know passion is like, I can't live without him, or I can't live without her, I suffer, When you go to the Passion of Christ, it's the story of the Passion of Christ is 3 days, which goes from the Last Supper to the crucifixion. And during that period of time, dealing with betrayal, being given outs, you don't have to go the distance with all of this. And Christ taking on, in the Christian religion, Christ taking on the love of humanity, which a remote God couldn't experience. That was the appeal of the Christian mystery of God becoming man, which actually has its roots in Greece, but that's all another thing. But anyway, but this was an ongoing conversation that's going on during the different religions. So God can't understand suffering. Gods and goddesses in Greek mythology can't understand the suffering of mortals. Okay, so God can't understand the suffering of a mortal unless God becomes mortal. And so the passion is loving mankind so much as to give down the mortal life for. So this is where you have martyrdom. This is where you have sacrifice. This is connected to Aries. It's not really Pisces, it's Aries, because it's that athletic commitment to suffering, okay, and laying down the life for the love of others. And that could be in a Christian context. That can be in a martyring context, which we hear coming out of the Mideast right now. Martyrdom was big during Bloody Mary with the burning of the Protestants. So everyone has their experience of laying down the life for the good of, which is a heroic ideal and which is absolutely connected to the zodiac sign of Aries.
So I took a class when I was single in my 20s, and it was about understanding men. Because at the time, I have Saturn in Cancer and in the seventh house. I was like, I don't understand men. And so it was
Someone help me out.
well, it was a fantastic class because it helped me understand the psychology. Because I'm kind of a girly girl. I'm a girl's, I have a lot of feminine energy in my chart. And one of the things that they said is the biggest compliment that you can give a man is to say, "You're my hero." And that really stuck with me. And they're like, hey, if, some guy helps you out with, like I got a flat tire and I was having a hard time with the jack or whatever. And this guy who I don't even know came and I was like, oh my God, you're my hero. And I saw just the smile on his face. And I think that's the thing that's missing right now is men feeling like they have that heroism. Like without that, then like you said, there's an embitterment, there's a blaming, so we have to get back to a place where there can be equality and inclusion, but we also can have heroes. And so that's what kind of struck me. And then what I think is interesting, so I want to go into next, we have Saturn moving into Aries.
Right.
Which is interesting because Saturn and Neptune have been traveling together in Pisces over the past year, but that was really at the end of Neptune in Pisces. And so now here we'll have Saturn and Neptune traveling together, but at the beginning of that cycle in Aries, which I think is kind of a very different, like Pisces, it's like everything's already, this is the end of the cycle. We've already been through all of this. Everything's kind of falling apart. But here we're having a new vision and Saturn's coming in, giving structure, making things real. I'd love to hear what you think about that.
I don't think it's a coincidence that you have Saturn and Neptune leaving the last zodiac sign and entering into the first zodiac sign. I mean, the order of the signs are done according to the agricultural year. Okay, this is why the zodiac begins with Aries, begins with the spring equinox. Astrology comes out of the northern hemisphere. And so the beginning of a year, and it's still celebrated as New Year's, is the spring equinox, in many countries, and United States sort of adopted that and then got rid of it and then adopted it again and got rid of it again. But anyway, and indeed, the whole idea of April Fool's Day was, oh, you still think the year begins with the spring equinox? It begins January 1st, and you like find out, so that's the origin of April Fool's Day.
I learned something every time. I love this.
So we were moving from the last sign of the zodiac to the first. And what's fascinating here is that it's exactly what you said. It's exactly what you said, which is we have the ending and then we have a beginning. Saturn is more associated to endings. Okay. Saturn is not big on beginnings. And indeed, when you follow planetary dignities, Saturn is in its fall in the zodiac sign of Aries. Okay. So this idea of the stumble, this idea of the fall, of the trip, okay, is going to be very strong with Saturn entering into the zodiac sign of Aries. Uh, the reason why, according to the schematic of planetary dignities, you did not want Saturn involved with Aries is Saturn rules the two signs of winter, Capricorn and Aquarius, here in the northern hemisphere. So you don't want a sign, a planet connected to chills and freezes showing up in spring. Okay, so this is why Saturn was in fall in Aries and exalted, celebrated in Libra, because this is the final time of the harvest. And the best way to end a harvest, as far as Western Europe was concerned, is the harvesting of grapes and the making of wine. Okay, which is
Right.
connected to Libra. Okay, so here we're going to really see this glamorization, the golden idol, and then Saturn comes in immediately to show off the clay feet. Okay, that you cannot have the myth without the clay feet, because Saturn's job is to do more than disillusion or debunk. Saturn's job is always to teach, and you can't learn if your eyes are full of stars and you're not. Saturn is a planet of doubt. It's a planet of questions. It's the planet that ruled over peoples who did not fit into society. Okay, so for instance, in Europe, this was Judaism, this was Islam, people who did not fit within the Christian European model. Saturn always ruled over people on the outskirts, on the margins, people who questioned, people who rebelled, people who did not fit in. They might be persecuted, that also, there's a whole long history of that. But this is what Saturn ruled over. So with Saturn in Aries, it's the immediate question. But for Saturn, a question, a doubt leads to education. It leads to learning. You don't learn if you don't question. Okay, if you question and see the difference, this is when it starts to become critical thinking. This is when it starts to become learning thinking. But Saturn doesn't give you a set of answers. Saturn's like, you questioned it, and now you have to live with the loneliness of doubt or the loneliness of a question. And where's that going to take you? Are you going to sit in a funk, or are you going to follow that line of questioning to discover? Because discover, experimentation, invention, this is all going to be celebrated in Saturn's other sign, not Capricorn, but Aquarius. Aquarius, the sign of the scientist, the sign of, okay, so Saturn leads to those things. So with Saturn entering Aries, we get the glamorization, but then we also get the exposure of the clay feet. We get the exposure of what's wrong here. Okay, and so Saturn begins this with some very powerful doubts and some very powerful questions.
And that's the thing. Saturn and Neptune don't always travel together. And
Mm-mm.
so the fact that they're traveling together during the beginning of this is so important. So I think everything can always play out. We can take the high road or we can take the low road, right?
Mhm.
And so I think Saturn traveling with Pisces has led to some degree, those two traveling together has been kind of a disillusionment, a checking out, a depression by a lot of people. So, we're going to have a revitalization of energy, which is obviously, no matter who you are, male, female, whatever country, I think there's like a whole new paradigm coming. But how does this play out on
We're
the,
in it. We're in it. It's
we're
not
in
coming.
it.
We're in it.
Okay. All right. We're already feeling this. And
Yeah.
it began, I believe, really when Pluto entered Aquarius, even in 2024 earlier.
I
So,
would start with the Saturn and Aquarius.
okay, back to the
Just saying.
2020. No,
Just
that's great. No, that's good. I have to, it, I've been following things so much closer the past couple of years because I was sort of on my little hiatus taking care of business in 2020. So astrology was low on my priority list, but let me ask you, what do you think the high expression of these two traveling together in Aries, like what can we expect like positively, or what is the cautionary tale? Like what could be, something that we have to be aware of that we're going to have to live with, but could realistically happen?
what is a father? Because Aries is one of the three zodiac signs of the father. And we have a lot of really positive expressions of that, by the way. I mean, the past couple of decades, we've had men taking on, what was traditionally the mothering of the woman's role, you know, and that has been extraordinary. That's been wonderful. Now, there are cultures in which men have always done this, so it was nothing new. I mean, men were always like, well, yeah, of course you help out with the house or whatever, but I don't know, somehow in the last 20 years, it was like men at home, stay-at-home dads. Wow, how novel, whereas other civilizations, it's been like, we've been dealing with stay-at-home dads for centuries, like, but that's, there have been wonderful examples of fathering and I'm not just talking fathering like having a child, like fathering can show up in mentoring. Fathering can show up in being there for someone else or teaching someone the ropes, the tricks of the trade, or guiding someone along those lines. And I think for a long time we had absent fathers. That was the big myth. We had absent fathers, not the big fiction. It wasn't a fiction, it was very real. Men for a number of decades, I think, pretty much following World War II, were seen as disposable. You go to war and okay, you get blown up and the
That's a big part of this. Yeah.
well, I think that disposableness, was there. We're seeing it sort of show up in the way that Russia is drafting men into the army, in that, but that's a different thing. But I want to actually bring that up as an example, this disposability of men. You just go and you fight and you get blown up or you come back in whatever way and maybe you benefit the family or something like that. So I think there was I have to either be a successful businessman or I'm disposable. And I think that that's something that really hung in the air for a while and it began to change and it's shifting. But I think right now, men are looking for what do I connect with? What makes me feel real? Is it virility and potency? Am I a animal channel, animal that like, I have to like, mate with every female here, or whatever? Or, is it being there for people? Is it fathering, either with a child or community or being an elder or a philanthropist or a role model? Because a lot of what we're hearing, especially in the past few years, is success is empty. The story of so many people who've made so much money, and what do? They need more because they don't know what else to live for. You know, it's Bernie Madoff. It's just there's an emptiness to it. It's not going to give you what you're looking for. And of course, this gets back to Buddhism, who, Buddha is a wealthy heir who walks out on that to find enlightenment. I mean, these are old themes and they come back in different ways, not in a redundant, repetitive, whatever way. They come back in different ways that speak to people of the time. So I think that in this instance, it's going to be an understanding of a father. Was my father there for me? Am I a better father than the father that I was? Am I fathering my father? Am I taking care of my father? I mean, these are going to be very potent and important themes. And what do I model my maleness on? I think is
And
all.
where we let men down so much. I mean, there's been in recent years, because women have and people of color have bared the brunt of a lot of bullshit in society, but we don't look at the BS that men have endured. And like to your point, when you're raised to think like, you know from very early on that men go to war, right? And what
Right.
is that? Now, men often are the ones
Or
that lead
leave.
us. What'd you say? Or
And go to war or leave, or they're not around, or they're right.
right, right. And what is your worth based on? And when we've been asked in very recent decades with younger generations than you and I, but to get in touch with your feelings, get in touch with your emotions, you know, they're not raised in sort of the harsh manner that generations before, where it was kind of like life is tough, suck it up. Right now it's like you should feel this, but we haven't given men the tools or the societal shift to help them process those feelings. And like, what does that mean? Can they access it? And even if they can, what do they then do with it? If
Right.
Right. And so that's when then there's a void created where all these kind of more toxic male influences are filling that void, kind of saying, well, it's this person's fault, it's that person's fault. And it's not, can't be your fault. Instead of like recognizing, like, actually, I need to feel this and move through it to the other side. But to your point too, like, I know my husband doesn't even watch my YouTube channel, so I can talk a little bit about him. He's really good. He's like way more clean than I am. Like, he's the one who does the dishes and things like that. But like for a while, he had a very traditional 1950s husband, father. And so his model when we first got married was this very much like the woman does everything. And I was working and
Right.
raising the child, and like it was I just could I was it couldn't sustain. And so we had to shift together. And I think as he shifted, our relationship grew and he became happier because, to your point, he was not disposable. We were in it together. And that's the piece that's missing. There's so much isolation.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's not just in the, by the way, the ball isn't just in the men's court. There have been a lot of women supporting that male expectation, over the years, and it's still very much there. But what's also interesting that I was thinking about is this idea of self-immolation, which is very Aries, picking up on some of the martyr themes, and the self-immolation is burning of self. And what I find fascinating about that is I think maybe it was about a year or so ago, there was an army officer who set himself on fire, I believe in Washington, D.C., to protest. I think it was I think it was war in Israel or it was Ukraine, and it's such a thing like who goes and sets themselves on fire like that? And and then we have a recent incident where someone blows up a car, a Tesla in front of the Trump Hotel, and it's another soldier, burning himself up. These and then of course we've got the other situation where someone becomes radicalized and kills these people in New Orleans with a vehicle. As an astrologer, you can't help but see, cars, Mars, guns, Mars, fire, Mars. You can't help but see those symbols that are coming to life. And I think nowadays we use words like mental health or radicalization, to explain and also to distance what's going on. These were troubled men struggling and trying to express or get rid of or maybe embrace something. But when we call it a radicalization, my feeling is like we're going to discover it's not about radicalizations or this or that. I mean, that's a process that we can use. You know, Luke Skywalker is radicalized to fight for the Force. I mean, if you want to use it that way, and that would hold up in the textual interpretation of Star Wars. But the thing is, there's a loss that lost man looking for is at the root of so many heroic myths, whether it's Star Wars or whether it's Parsifal, you know, but that lost man looking for something that's larger. And I think with this kind of violence that comes out, it's what is that saying that we need to understand as astrologers, in the way that the planets are speaking to us in our society right now.
that the one who blew himself up in front of Trump Tower, in his suicide note, one of the things he said was that he did this because Americans just pay attention to a spectacle. And Mars was opposing Pluto right when this happened. And we talked a lot about how, Martian energy is going to be so prevalent this year. And, the only emotion that is sanctioned for men is anger, right? And so to create this sort of spectacle.
And fire and air is spectacle, by the way.
Fire and air spectacle. So on the downside, the things to prepare for is more of that kind of spectacle, more of that kind of violence and
Think,
martial.
but
But that's what I'm asking you. It's a question.
yeah, because aren't you struck by the bitterness and the incredible sadness for someone to write that
And
and to
and
lose
and
their
the and
lives
the
over
yeah,
that?
and the blame, a lot of the blame was put on like things like DEI, like diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Oh, is that part of his
That was part of his thing. And what that just kind of like the male grievance versus the actual understanding. Like, armchair psychologist, you look and you see this man literally, like, he was cheating on his wife because he felt empty inside, and his wife just had a new baby and she left him. And he couldn't deal with the PTSD from war, and he couldn't deal with being abandoned by a woman he probably loved and a new baby that he wanted to like care for and be that hero. I mean, so I don't know as much about the New Orleans person, but I can only speculate it's a similar sort of situation where there is so much pain from being in.
there's a collapse in the home, in the life, in the narrative, that again we too quickly call a mental illness. There's a malaise. There's something much more potent, not more potent than mental illness. That's totally bad. But there's something there that can't just be labeled or written off. That demands our attention, care, and investigation, exploration. There's something calling from psyches and plight. That are
Our
calling.
society is in pain
Yeah,
collectively. And that Mars opposing the Pluto, here we have Pluto and Aquarius, the expression of society and
right.
societal wounding. And here Mars was just the fuse. Mars opposing it was like, how do we deal with society pain and this individual's pain where they're colliding? And I think that's potentially, and that's how we end up in these terrible wars, because my guess is that, Mr. Russia there has a tremendous amount of personal pain that is just being, and the X-Man, like their personal pain is being played out on a much larger scale.
But we have to also bring a respect and an appreciation for it's such a complex conversation, which is why the planets are really introducing these ideas. I don't think, not only do we not have the answers right now, I'm not even sure we have the questions yet, because we have to sort of adapt to the change in light when a modern planet changes the signs and as they set up house here, because even the things that we're saying right now may be irrelevant, from where these planets go and the conversations that they bring up. But certainly the idea of identity, Mars versus Pluto, which is I matter as a person, society is like, do you? To even, the AI debate and robots taking care of, I matter as a human being, Pluto and Aquarius, do you? Automaton or AI work can do it so much better than you. So these questions of identity, it's more than just diversity and equity. It's not more than, it builds on that.
No, and
Something that
that's and
really,
that's just a part of, right. It's a part of it. And so here's where then we have Uranus move into Gemini, and that
Mhm.
happens in July. And
Mm,
so that's another big thing that's happening. Jupiter will move into Cancer, but we can just touch on that briefly. But I think the more important thing is the Uranus into Gemini, because
yeah.
maybe that's when we start to understand what the questions are.
Yeah, Uranus in Gemini has a big reputation in astrology, and particularly in American astrology. It's the Civil War astrologer Luke Dennis Broughton who actually starts to work with Uranus in his almanac, the Planetary Guide, which he was initially launched as sort of like an introduction to astrology, but the Civil War breaks out. He actually accurately predicts the Civil War. And so it then becomes about really talking about the war and working with predictions of the war. Broughton is famous for having predicted the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. It's why it's hard to find uh, copies of his astrological magazine because all the Civil War collectibles grabbed it. But anyway, but he's the one who first begins to work with Uranus, who at the time was called Herschel, named after the person who had discovered it. And so he's the one who says that at 9 degrees Gemini, the American War for Independence begins. When Uranus reaches 9 degrees Gemini, the American War for Independence began. And when Uranus left Gemini, it came to an end. And that's true. That's exactly what happened. And he used that to forecast the Civil War. He said, I think it's like April, right? April of 1861, Uranus will be at 9 degrees Gemini. There will be a terrific war. And of course, that's the firing of Fort Sumter. And when Uranus leaves Gemini, which is like around April of the Appomattox, is the end of the Civil War. So this is what began Uranus's connection to 9 degrees Gemini and war. This is where it comes from. And then Evangeline Adams, who is a very famous, popular female astrologer in the 19 teens and 20s here in America, finds a copy, not of Broughton, but of Hazelberg writing about Broughton. And she says, well, you know, Uranus is coming back to 9 degrees Gemini again. She's being interviewed by the press in 1923 before she embarks to go on a tour of England, and they're like, what do you see up ahead? And she's like, the end of prohibition and all these sorts of things. But she says, there's going to be a great war that comes. And they're like, not another one. And she's like, oh no, this will be very definitive for America. And they're like, well, what is it about? And she's like, Uranus, 9 degrees Gemini. They're politely writing everything down, but you can read it in the New York Times. They actually carry it in an article. And she says, we will have a terrific war that redefines America in 1942.
Wow.
And so this is where Uranus's connection to 9 degrees Gemini becomes a thing. And of course, it will be at 9 degrees Gemini in 2027. And so when we hear talk of civil war and split and, all these sorts of things, but just because these things happened doesn't mean that they can't be, and this is the beauty of humanistic astrology, they can't be retranslated or redirected. You can have a war of the psyche that's taking place. It doesn't have to be an act, and then you can have an actual war, and that's the war. But that was just to sort of give you the lowdown on where that comes from. But Uranus in Gemini is going to be a quickening type of energy, and it's going to be sextiling that Neptune and Saturn in Aries, and it's going to be trining the Pluto in Aquarius. What I like about that is that Gemini is a very one-on-one sign, okay? And it's very conversational and things like that. So that almost gives us a direction to go in which instead of hard squares, which would be a tearing or a rendering, we have more conversation and we have more trying to work out solutions and actually working with the idea. It's a very wonderful Gemini thing, which is not pretending that you know the answer. Let's just work out the questions and see where we arrive, sort of thing. So I kind of see that as being a benevolent energy, but for the Geminis, it will be very activating. It's going to be a very, very powerful transit for Geminis.
So when we put all of this together, big change, no matter how we look at it, it's all big change. It's in a lot of ways can be potentially very welcome, even if we have this kind of potential warlike energy or hyper masculinity, there is at least something new. And I think that there has been a stagnation and a feeling since COVID of just feeling stuck, feeling like we haven't been able to break free from the division that we felt. You know, Jupiter in Cancer, that's a very nationalistic. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm trying to look at the positive potential.
I I think the positive potential is growing up.
Maturity, you think?
Growing up. I mean, that's the positive potential that's yet to really be accessed here. It's growing up. Okay, said as a true Capricorn, but
No, it's important.
but the loss and the stagnation and the grief of COVID is we lost a world. Okay, we can't go back to what the world was before. The world was really good for some people before, but that's gone. And that's not going to be retrieved, and it's not going to be resurrected, and it's not going to be brought around again. Pluto and Aquarius is you have to keep moving into the future. That's Pluto in Aquarius. And Pluto Aquarius is I'm going to bring back these lessons from the past. And what's that phrase? Or I have a t-shirt, which I love. It's my favorite, one of my favorites, which is, "Don't make me repeat myself," is the quote. And the dash, the source of it is history. Okay. It's history saying, don't make me repeat myself. But this is the use of history. We don't, I mean, we never repeat it. No one steps into the same river twice. Okay. But, we don't have to repeat it. And what's being called upon here is growing up, listening to other people's stories, giving everyone a place at the table, because the table is actually the only place we have. Everyone a place on the planet. Okay, let's go with that. Wars, who can afford to fight a war anymore? Really? Who can afford to fight it? Grow up. Okay, so this was the beginning message of Saturn in Aquarius during COVID. You're all getting sent to your room to think about the world that you want to live in. And so we all got released thinking we could, that it was munchkins after the Wicked Witch the East has been destroyed, and realizing no, that world doesn't exist anymore. So where do we go? Do we mourn for our past or whatever? Or do we grow up? And do we take onto our shoulders the responsibility of what it's like to live in society? We
And the
want to
personal responsibility, right? Because
personal
right,
response.
Saturn in Aries is saying personal responsibility for society, right? I love that.
Right. Right. And, listen to these conversations with fresh ears, and be sensitive to labeling. When we call someone toxic, does that really bring the person closer to us, or does it repulse that person from us? Things like that. Hear and listen to those things, which I think are going to be very Uranus and Gemini, actually. But no, I think this is all about growing up and taking responsibility for the planet in toto. It's not just the environment, but the people on the planet and people living in these war-torn countries. Why? Why? Honestly, and just turning to some people, and I know it sounds silly, but just saying, grow up, you know, treasure your people, treasure your environment, treasure what you have, and listen to other people's stories, because you might think you have the answers and you may not. You might even be part of the problem. But you're not going to work to an answer if you're being labeled the problem. You're going to work towards the answer if you're being given a chance to cooperate and coordinate and to work with others.
Yeah, I think there does need to be that change in all of us. And that's every single one of us in order to get us to this place. And we were talking before, and we'll kind of close out on this, but we were talking about individually before we started recording, and I loved what you were saying, because it's exactly how I feel, which is like the cosmos is doing its thing. The gods are on a path. They've got a plan. And so how do we in our own lives impact that plan? How do we take care of ourselves in the meantime? What do we do? And I was loving what you were talking about. If you want to just quickly touch base on it, and then I can let you go, because I know I've taken you over time, but
Oh, no, it's fine. I apologize that I don't know the name of the Stoic philosopher, but there was many Stoic philosophers.
I can try and look it up and put
But
it in.
sure. But there was one who says, you can't solve the problems of the world. You know, if a society decides to go to war, if a society, makes these bad decisions, if there's calamity, if there's disaster, if there's floods, famines, all these sorts of things, you can't fight or solve that. And in fact, what this philosopher was saying, when you stay there, when you focus on that, you focus on your helplessness and your hopelessness. And so you lose yourself as a person. It's like, nowadays when we turn on a TV and we see these horrible things and we feel impotent and hopeless and helpless and we can't do anything. Okay. And what this philosopher would say is take your gaze away from that. You can't do anything on those levels. And not even the people in charge can do anything on those levels. It's a runaway train. What you can do is that you can focus on your life. You can make a good life. You can be a good person. You can have a good family or a good community or a good society. You can do what you can to make your corner of the world a lovely, beautiful corner of the world that feeds into the streams of other people's lives. Maybe you made a difference for someone that day. Maybe you're someone that other people want to emulate. Maybe you created a haven or a safe space for people to come and take shelter. Maybe you spoke up at a time when someone needed to speak up, or maybe you were quiet because someone needed to find their own way or to fight their own battle. And so this person talks about that's the focus. You're given a life, and with that life, you can shape things. You can shape the lives around you in cooperation, in sensitivity, in insensitivity, not insensitive, but insensitivity, in
Yeah.
that spirit, that heart of sensitivity towards others. That's where you can make more than the difference. You can make the difference, but that's where you can make life and the world happen. And it's one of those questions, if everyone gave $1 towards whatever, we would have wiped out. But it's a fantastic question because if everyone lived their life in a way that was true to them and their purpose in a place of understanding, maybe they're a big to do and maybe they're not a big to do. Maybe they're one of the many things that makes a big to do or a big influence. But this is how the world grows. This is how the world is taken care of. I mean, let's face it, our planet is ready to get rid of us and give the world to the insects. I mean, it's like, oh God, this human race species, it's like they didn't even last as long as the dinosaurs. What a bore. Let's float them out and give it to the insects and the fish. Okay, so if we want a world, we are the gardeners. The Bible begins with God was a gardener. We are the gardeners, and it's up to us to garden our own lives and find that community garden and find that way. That's where our focus, in my opinion, is going to be the most fulfilling and the most special, the most effective.
And that's what we were talking about, the rippling out. I mean, it is during this time as things are closing out before this fresh new energy. If you just get depressed and overwhelmed, like I read this horrible story about a doctor in Palestine, and I felt so helpless, and I just automatically felt like I can't, and I really couldn't think of anything I could do to impact this. And
Mhm.
I think about all of the people, even the people in Israel who are taking to the streets and protesting. I mean, by the thousands, and it does, and it's not having, and that's where I come back to, like, there's some sort of, the gods have a plan. I'm not saying any of this is justified, but the biggest thing that we can do is to tend to our own home, and that's part of that Aries energy too, which is, like you said, grow up, like, be a good person. And the Christ consciousness, I love that story. That's fascinating to me. So
And the thing is, all of these things do have a part to play. You
yeah.
know, the creature that died unceremoniously in a prehistoric pond didn't know it was going to become a fossil that would talk of the time that it lived. So every little thing, honestly, matters, and that's the thing we can celebrate. And that's the thing that we can give to ourselves and to people.
Yeah. So 2025 has a lot of really exciting, it's an exciting time to be alive, and it's exciting to see what ends up happening. Um,
We're living at very
Definitely.
exciting times.
I watch every single one of Christopher Renstrom's videos, and I encourage everyone out there to as well, because I always learn something new, and it's always very encouraging. He is not overtly political like I am, but he has wonderful lessons and themes and historical references that, is fantastic. So make sure to go to his YouTube channel and subscribe. And I hope you do come back, because
Oh,
it's so
I love
enlightening to chat with you every single time.
it's enlightening to chat to you too, to chat with you as well. Yeah, no, it's wonderful. You're a wonderful, you're a wonderful conversationalist.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Thank you. South Node in
You're a
Gemini.
wonderful astrologer. That's
Oh,
the
thank,
real thing to
thank
celebrate.
you. Yeah. So anyway, everybody check out Christopher's work, check out my work. I'm going to have links below. There is a reason and a season for it all. The cosmos and the universe are conspiring to help us, and this is just an exciting time to be alive. So bring it on, 2025.
Uh,